Hello there. If we have not met yet, my name is Angela Clark, the artist behind Clark Fine Art, and today I'm going to share with you how I painted this 11 by 14 watercolor painting for a recent commission. Let's get to it. In the interest of time, I have sped up this video because it took me about 20 hours to actually complete this painting. So you'll see here, I first started off, I sketched out where my couple would be, and I masked them off to protect the paper while I did the background. I left this mask on for quite a while. It actually was on there for about a week, and luckily it did remove cleanly. I was really worried about that. But here you'll see I'm just starting to lay in my lightest colors in the distance. With watercolor, you have to build your values and definitely start with your lightest values first. I found this to be a bit challenging when I first made the move into watercolor. Before that, I've always worked with the acrylics, and I love acrylics because they're so forgiving. If you make a mistake, you just let it dry, paint over it, and carry on. With watercolor, I think that's why I had 20 hours in this one. It was a very special commission. There was a very special sentiment behind it, and I was really wanting to take my time and do it justice. So you'll see here, I'm just starting to lay in where everything's going to be. Starting to place down where my road's going to be. I've got the end of the pathway that the couple's walking on. And I'm just going to slowly continue to build up my layers. Now that I have those light values, the light that's going to filter through the trees, I'm starting to add in some of where the actual tree trunks will be that you can see through other branches. And again, I'm going very light here. As I continue, these will darken up and actually change shape. But I'm using one of the colors that will be in the background, so that should I make a mistake or I need to change something, I can easily do so and it won't show up in the finished product. So you see here, I just continue to start laying in where some of those the colors that are filtering through my trees in the light that's in the background. I'm starting to lay all of that stuff in. Quite a few times I laid stuff down and then thought, no, that's a little dark. Don't quite want that there, and started to change it. But here you'll see I'm starting to lay down the lightest green for my trees. Again, this is the trees that are catching the rays of sunshine deeper in the path. And just spraying some water there to get some neat effects, some natural effects. Spritz that water on and it'll just move your colors and gives a really nice effect for foliage. So I'm continuing to lay in the foliage and start to get an idea of where this stuff needs to be so that I can continue to build my values on top of that. It's going to be quite a few layers. This was definitely a lot of layers. I'm laying out the left side of the painting and putting in that foliage along the path. I know this is going to have to darken up a lot. This is going to be the darkest area of my painting. And because this was a very special commission, I wanted to make sure that I took my time and definitely did it justice and continued to just build up those layers slowly. If this was just a painting that I grabbed a reference photo for and sat down to paint, I probably would have gone a lot faster, simply because I wouldn't have cared as strongly about the end result. I mean, yes, I'd want it to look good, but as long as it looked similar, then that would be okay. Here, I actually had taken the time. I received a reference photo of this couple, and the reference photo itself was not very great, but because of COVID and the fact that this could not be reproduced, the original photo could not be reproduced, we just went off. I removed the couple from the original photo, and then in talking to the client, there was a specific desire for the end result. And we went and I found this background image on Pixabay, and then we kind of edited it and placed the couple in, and I added the shadows and to just really make it look like the couple was always walking down this path. And just to give a little bit of background story, because I know I do have permission from the individual who commissioned the artwork. This is a piece to represent his grandparents and his grandmother, who's 98 years old. During, COVID, they couldn't really see her much, and contact, obviously was very limited, especially since she was, in a nursing facility, nursing care facility. And so the picture could not be reproduced, and we just went with what we had. But his grandfather had actually, they lost him when he was very, very, very young, if not before he was born. I apologize if I don't have that information correctly, and I know he's going to watch this. And at his current stage in life, he's told that he looks very much like his grandfather, especially from behind. And this photo was of him and his grandmother walking, and comments were made that it actually looked like his grandfather and his grandmother walking, his grandfather then walking his grandmother now. And he really wanted to have a painting that would give that feeling of his grandfather coming back and bringing his grandmother on to heaven. So that was the purpose of this commission. And I knew it was going to be a gift for his mom. This is of her mother, and Olivia is the grandmother's name, and it was going to be going to his mother, her daughter. So it was very special. I knew it was going to be a very special painting, and it went to the framer once he got it from me, and it was when the framer had it that Olivia had actually passed. But he has since given the painting to his mom, who absolutely loved it. Family members have definitely appreciated having this, and it was certainly my honor to be a part of that. So if any of you are watching, my condolences to each of you, and I am so glad that this has brought you some sort of joy in such a terrible time. I did receive a beautiful note from Anne, who is Olivia's daughter, and it was wonderful. So thank you so much if you're watching for that. It meant a lot to receive your note. And so if we get back to this here, you'll see that I'm continuing to build these layers, and I'm starting to darken up my foliage. It's really hard because the colors are so light and the lights above my easel are so bright, it really kind of washes out the top part of this painting right now because the colors are so light, but that is quickly going to start to change. And I am working. I started this painting on my desk. I had it flat, and that was for my initial washes because I wanted to get them down. I did not want them to move. Here you'll see I'm just kind of splattering in some speckling on the roadway to give it a natural look of, rocks and pebbles that you might see along your path. So I did start with this flat for my initial washes because I didn't want that, the paint to move. It was very wet at that point. But now that I'm starting to build up my layers, I'm working with a lot less water. I'm not working a lot of wet into wet, more wet onto dry, so that it's just my paint is going and staying exactly where I put it. So I moved to my easel for this part because it was just easier for me, it's easier sometimes to work upright versus sitting the project flat on my desk. I do both, but this way I found easier. So I'm going to continue to build in the foliage and I'm just building it up layer by layer. The more layers, of course, the more depth you can add to a painting. And I certainly wanted to have a lot of depth going down this pathway and leading you into the light. So, I told you the backstory, but if you didn't know the backstory for this painting, where's the couple going? Obviously, they're walking towards the light, but what is the light? So, in the sense for this painting, of course, he's leading her on, right, to the hereafter. So, I wanted to make sure that I had lots of depth into this painting, lots of layers. Every time I'm just slightly adjusting my colors just a little bit darker each time and continuing. And there I'm just sort of splattering in some leaf foliage to really give some natural texture. Our brain can like to create patterns for us even when we don't want them to. And of course, in nature, you don't have perfectly evenly spaced leaves every single time on a tree, and not one branch looks like another. So I really wanted to try to break some of that up. So I would splatter some of the foliage in, and then I would go and I say, okay, how can I connect that and create a branch out of this? And here I'm starting to build up the darker tree that's closest to us in the foreground. So the more I build this up, it pushes every other layer back even further, creating a lot more depth into this painting. And you'll see that I'm going to continue to do that layer by layer. At this point, this was far from close to being finished. And I will pause, let the top part dry, and go on and move to different. So you're going to see me different areas. So you'll see me keep kind of bouncing around. And the reason that I'm bouncing around is because I need one area to completely dry before I go work on the next. Otherwise, my colors are just going to bleed into each other. So I definitely need that to dry before I can continue working. So here, I know that I need this front left corner. This is the darkest part of my painting. I have to keep building that up, but I don't want to go too quickly. I didn't want to just jump in with a dark color and say, well, looks almost black in my reference photo, and then you're not going to see the texture. I wanted to continue to build that up. So there I'm just splattering some more texture onto the road and continuing to build up those values. I was really worried as I was doing this because I did have that masking fluid on that painting for quite a while. And the longer your masking fluid sits, if any of you have masked paper to do a watercolor, you know that the longer that mask sits, the bigger the risk that you're going to rip that paper when you take it off. So I was very worried as I was working on this project that I would get all of this work done, hours and hours and hours in, and go to remove that masking at the very end to do my couple and have this paper tear and have to start from scratch, which would have been heartbreaking. So I just kept crossing my fingers and saying, oh, am I at a point yet where I can remove it? Am I at a point yet where I won't be working around them? And because I wanted to have that paper nice and white and not have to worry about any of my background coming through on my couple to where those colors would show through and affect that. So I knew I had to mask them to start this, but yeah, I was worried. If you've done this before and you have another option or something else that you have tried, drop me a comment below and let me know, because I would love to hear what works for you, especially if you're going to be working on a project. This was days. I was days and days on this project. I would work on it when I could. And like I said, there's 20 hours. I had 20 hours of footage, over 20 hours when I transferred this all into my video editing program, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure when I finished exactly how many hours I had in until I compiled all the video, and then I just, wow, 20 hours. It did not seem like 20 hours. I will say that it did not seem like 20 hours. I really enjoyed this process. I really enjoyed from start to finish. I had a few challenges, and, overcoming those, it was, I think at one point, and I'm sure we'll be able to see that come up here before long, I had done some of the foliage on the left, and I was working on it. I was like, oh, this looks great. And I had such detail. And then I paused for the day and I left it on my easel, and I came back in the next morning and I thought, there's way too much detail. For the area of the painting that was, it was just way too much detail. You wouldn't see that much detail, and it actually was taking away from the overall effect of the painting. So I had to fix that. And I did, but it was such a great, every painting is a learning experience. Every single time I sit down to paint, I encounter or learn something new. And does that happen to you? Let me know, because it seems like every time I sit down to do a painting, something will happen. And it's those challenges of overcoming, I don't want to say our mistakes, because I don't think of it as a mistake. I learn from every single experience. So it's those experiences where things don't necessarily go exactly as we planned, and how we overcome them or work through them, I value each and every time something like that happens. But when I'm working on a commission, I would appreciate it if they didn't happen often. So, yeah, here we're just laying in more, getting our colors worked up. In this area, the area right above the couple's heads, I'd worked that and I thought, oh, this is too dark. I needed to brighten it up. You'll see in the reference picture on the left that's on my iPad, that area is so much bigger than the area that I ended up with. And the reason that I shrunk that down more, that was a choice to make that area smaller. And because I didn't want this big, vast openness, I wanted to shrink it down so that it pushed it back, made it further in the distance, right? This is a journey. They're going on a journey, whether, albeit meaning the end of the road in our physical life here. This is a journey where they're going to, and I really wanted it to take you in deeper and, help think about that. I really elongated the shadows behind them so that it helped, emphasize that, right? This is much further away from them, and that light shining towards them. So that was a choice to create that area much smaller than my reference photo was. And basically I was using this reference as a guideline, right? We had this image picked. The client liked the background image. Oh, you'll see here, this, I was actually using another brush, and I'm just using water. I'm pulling up some areas. I'm lifting some of that color, because where I wanted that light filtering through, I didn't feel my lines were getting consistent. So I turned the painting on its side to help me, and I just used my brush as a guide to make sure that those were all kind of lining up and would look naturally like the light was just filtering through the trees in those areas. So that's what I was doing there. That was some lifting. Again, it was that one area. When you're building a painting like this, you're looking at these things, and these are in the background. This is what you're imagining is deep behind all these layers that I can actually see. And I know that as I build this color, if I put it in the wrong spot, then when I get to the end, it's not all going to line up right. It's not all going to look right. So trying to keep that cohesive, if you would, it was trying me a couple times, and but again, I enjoyed the process. It was such a good experience. So as we go through here, this is just going to be more layering, and I'm just going to let this play, and I will come back through and share some more information as I see things that become pertinent. So you see here, I'm starting to darken up the foreground. And it seemed like every time I went through and I darkened up the foreground, I first put the color down. Of course, it's watercolor. When you first put it down, it's darker than it will be once it dries. And I would put that color in and I'd say, okay, that's nice and dark. And that's going to be it. That's good. And then it would dry and I'd say, that's not close. I've got to go much darker than that. So again, it just added to building those layers. And here I'm starting to establish like where some of my shadows are going to be for my couple. And the road, obviously the road closest to us in the foreground has to really darken up. So I'm starting to lay that down as well. And paying really close attention to where their feet are making contact with the road and how their shadows will how their shadows are going to appear by where the light's coming from. So you see there, I kind of set my, took one of my paintbrushes and I set that angle, the lights cut to see where the light was coming from, same as I had with my rays coming through, because I wanted to make sure that I was consistent in how those shadows were being cast. And it's those attention to those kind of details that are going to help your paintings feel cohesive or not. Sometimes you'll just look at a painting and think, I have this one painting that I did a couple of years ago now, and when I first did it, I loved it. I had the sky reflecting in the water, and the reflections were great, and I thought, this is wonderful. And I had clouds in the sky, and then about a week later, something was bugging me when I'd look at the painting. And then I thought, it's the clouds. I had these such prominent clouds in the sky, and if everything else was reflecting the way it was in the water, there was no way those clouds would not also have been seen in the water. And I didn't bring the clouds into the water. So there was just that little something that at first glance, it may not jump out at you. But it's one of those things that just kind of, bugs your eye, and your brain says something's not right here. And obviously this is just a painting and not a real image, and it was just something I created. I wasn't going by a reference photo. If I was, I probably would have seen the clouds and I wouldn't have made that mistake. But it taught me a valuable lesson, and that's something that I strive for, is that cohesiveness throughout the painting. So if I painted the shadows differently, depending on where the light is coming from, it could be one of those things that your brain goes, something's not quite right here. So, attention to details. Here, this is the area that I was talking about. I was putting some detail in right there where I'm working. I was putting in some details, and I really was working that area because I looked at my reference photo and I thought, well, there's the way that the foliage showed up, and I started to add in these details, and then I thought, to see that much detail after I left it overnight, and then I came back, and to see that much detail, it would have to be much closer to us. And given that I had shrunk down that background and I wanted that to be much further away, I could not put that much detail into that area, because if I did, it's going to bring it so much closer to the viewer. So I definitely go back and I fixed that and worked through that issue without any problem. But that was one of those things I just thought, wow, this is looking great. And then I let it sit for a night and I came back and then I thought, oh, this is not so great. So I will do that a lot too. I will paint something and then I'll let it sit on my easel and I'll come back to it in a day or two and look at it again before I say something is finished. And now if you see here, if you're looking at the picture in the upper right corner here, these shadows look so much darker right now than the shadow that we actually end up with. Now the road's not as dark as it's going to be, and here we are another day painting. But here we are, that shadow was so much darker, and I didn't want it to be that dark. The foreground needed to darken up, and the shadow wouldn't have been as prominent. So I'm going to work through that too as we continue along. But I'm just continuing to add in the the foliage and the greenery from the trees, and trying to work that there's multiple trees here. We're not looking at just one. So I'm trying to paint branches in the background, let those dry, and then paint the branches that are going to go over them in the foreground. So it's definitely such a long layering process. And here you can see I'm going to start to work up where some of those trunks are going to be, because I'm going to want to see parts of those tree trunks through some of the foliage. Now, if I just painted all the trunk completely like a big straight line, like I would in acrylic, I would have just grabbed the paint that I wanted for my trunk, paint my trunk in, paint all my branches in, and then I would have had a map for where all my leaves need to go. And I would have come back and added my color on top of that. I can't do that in watercolor. And that, I have to say, when I first started dealing with watercolor, that was my biggest frustration going from acrylics to watercolor, was that I can't just give myself a roadmap like I'm used to in acrylics. I actually have to think of the end result, and I had to paint these trunks in and leave the space for the branches that were going to cover over them where you wouldn't see any of the trunks through them. Because had I painted just a straight line, watercolors are so transparent, you can actually see all the layers through, and you would have seen the lines of those trunks through every other layer moving forward. So trying to leave that space but keep it consistent, like the line of the tree, where it's going to be here and there. And that was a little bit of a challenge. So just continuing to add in and layer up. And I'm really trying to work that tree that's going to come through above the couple and the ones further in the background. You'll see here, I grabbed another paper, and I was working this throughout this project because I was very, I didn't want to mess this up. And this was a very special project. And anytime I thought about doing something, I tested it on that board first. So I actually have another painting that's a partial of this painting, where anytime I thought about something, I would mix that. If it was a new color, I would mix the color up. I would test it on that other painting. And Or if I wanted to do a certain technique with my brush, I would grab my paint. I would do it on that one first and see, how does that look? Does that look right? Does the color look right? Was the color cohesive with the rest of the painting? And I would test everything before I actually put it into my commission piece. So I encourage you, if you're doing something like this and you're unsure, grab a piece of paper. Now, mind you, that was also a piece of watercolor paper, but it was like just a less expensive cellulose pulp type paper. So I know that paper is not going to react exactly the same as the piece that I'm using for my commission, because the piece that I'm using for my commission is actually cotton paper, and watercolors do react differently on different papers. However, it gave me that basic understanding of how it was going to look and how the colors would look together. So you might see that pop back in here and there often. And then I even did that for the couple later on. You're going to see I have another smaller piece where when I removed the masking, I wanted to make sure that I had everything right for the couple, like where the folds of the material needed to go, and to make it look like they're walking. You know, when you take a step, fabric wrinkles. So we see that. So I actually sketched out the night before I was going to start working on the couple, and I paused, because when I have my background finished and I feel that it's finished, I walked away and I left it on my easel, and I would come in. I left it for a couple days. I would come in and I would look. Did anything stand out to me? Was anything different? And see, here again, you're seeing me putting in even more darker colors. The darker I go in the foreground, the further back it pushes the rest of my painting. That light gets further and further away from me. So you're going to see here, and every time, like I said, I think, this is it. I've got it dark enough now. And then it would dry, and I'd say, no, that's not quite. My darks weren't dark enough. My lights are light enough, but my darks aren't dark enough. And having that contrast, I think, in my opinion, really starts to make your art stand out. It really gives that more realistic look to it. So I love to amp up some of the contrast in my subject matter. I do like to paint in a realistic style. So here I had left the painting when I thought my background was done. I felt it was finished. And I left it for a couple days, and I would just come in and I would look at it. And if I would see something that seemed a little off or not quite right, I would fix it. But then I'd leave it again. I would walk away for another day. I wanted to make sure when I removed that masking, my background was finished. The only thing I had left to do was to paint my couple. And of course, I was still worried this whole time that this mask was not going to come off cleanly, because most of my time was in the background of this painting. And that's something, I don't know if that's something you do. If it is, drop me a comment. Let me know. Do you walk away from it? Before you call it finished, do you walk away? Do you leave it on the easel? Do you come back and look at it again, excuse me, later and see, here I'm darkening up the shadows again. And that road is still not dark enough, because those shadows are definitely standing out more so than they should be for as dark as our foreground is supposed to be. So there it is. I've unmasked the couple, and I was so excited that the paper did not rip. I did not have to go through this again. So I've left this for a few days. I had come back. I removed the masking. That was a quick painting that I did where I sketched my couple in yet again, and I started working on how I wanted them to look. And now I'm going to go by that as a reference for where I'm putting in some colors. And here I'm just protecting the right side, because I don't want to transfer or bump a color, get it on my hand, and then touch where, Olivia's at in the painting, and then I have just messed it up because her clothes are very light in color. And of course, being right-handed, I work from left to right so that I risk messing it up even less. So I'm just laying in the different values. The shirt was black, so the shirt went pretty quick, but it had, trying to get textures and see folds and highlights and shadows in a black shirt, not the easiest thing to do. Definitely was not the easiest thing to do. So here I'm starting to do the pants, and you'll see here I actually have a pencil in my hand, and right there I am using a Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencil. These are light fast. They are water soluble pencils to where I could go in and lay down some of the details where I knew I was going to want them, and then come back and take my brush and actually paint on and use that as a good guide. I really did not want to risk messing up any part of this. So you'll see that I actually go in and put quite a bit of that down. And now here I have my paintbrush. And so I'm adding water and I'm bringing in more color and activating the color from the actual pencil and getting because he's wearing jeans. So I'm trying to get this denim to look correct and have all of the folds and creases where it needs to. And I'm going to do the same thing. There's using another water pencil, and just because I wanted to be able to get really fine detail. And every time I mixed my color for the skin, because you're seeing the back of his head, and although he is not bald, he has a very short haircut, which if you've ever tried to paint a military style haircut, you can see through the hair. So you're seeing the skin. And for those of you, because I think I'm assuming this may be what had happened recently before the actual original picture was taken, I'm going to bet that he had recently got a haircut. Because if you've ever had a military style haircut, if you're out in the sun and your hair's longer, your neck gets nice and tan, and you get a haircut, and that you can see through now because the hair is so short, and the scalp is actually much lighter in color, so you can see a paler color through. Well, when I was starting to work this, excuse me, and on the original reference photo, it was making him look almost balding and possibly graying. It's very hard when you're working with a reference photo that this one was blurred, and we knew from the get-go. I made sure that I told him this was not the best reference photo for me to use. But again, given the circumstances, Olivia's 98 years old. We are in the middle of a pandemic. It was not as if he could just go visit his grandmother and have somebody take another picture. That wasn't an option. So doing the best with what we had, I was trying to be very careful. And if you're listening, I have to tell you, that was one of my biggest challenges, was the back of the head, because I didn't want to make him look bald if he wasn't balding. And I didn't want him to make him look gray if he wasn't graying, because then that doesn't accurately portray your subject. And when you're doing a commission of two specific people, you definitely want to make sure that your commission looks like those two specific people. And I encourage you that if you're not sure, ask. I went through and just kept working this, and then you'll see that I go back and I'm going to work on his head a few times, because I am building up those layers of color, and there's going to be multiple times that I kind of change and tweak things a little. And here you'll see I'm starting to work on Olivia, and I've left his head, and now I'm coming back to it. And I'm going to walk away from that point and come back again a couple times. And I really hope, Mike, if you're watching this, that you're happy with the way that turned out, because that was definitely one of my challenges. And I think we've had that conversation since you've received the painting, but that was definitely a challenge. And let me know if you're watching this. Thanks for staying with me this far. I greatly appreciate you spending your time with me today and watching this come together. What is your biggest challenge when you're painting? Is it people? Is it portraits? Is there a specific subject matter that usually, that tends to give you a hard time? Let me know. Drop me a comment below. I definitely read all of my comments. And YouTube does reward interaction, and I greatly appreciate it. If you're enjoying this video and you've received any kind of value out of it, please do give it a thumbs up. If you know somebody that would benefit, hit that share button. But certainly, at the very least, drop me a comment and let me know, what do you think, and what is it that challenges you most when you're painting? Apparently, it's the back of a head with a military haircut and ocean waves. Those are the two things that really get me take up a lot of my time trying to perfect them. So be very, very happy to hear what you have to say. Drop me a comment below. But now I've moved on, and I'm still not happy. I am still not happy. If you can see that reference photo, you'll see that it looks much different in the end. I'm not finished with you yet. We're going to come back to that head. But now moving on to Olivia, and I'm starting to lay in the color. And you'll see me go back and forth from painting the color. I was trying to get she's wearing a beige or taupe jacket and or khaki, and like khaki pants or slacks. And I wanted to make sure, so this is a very warm toned painting. Now obviously the denim is a cooler tone, but I didn't want to have the taupe be that cool, have a cool undertone to it. I want it to be very cohesive with the rest of the painting. And so many times I mixed up that color, and I was like, this isn't quite right. This isn't quite right. And then once I finally did get that, a lot of it I was able to find a water pencil that I liked and a regular watercolor. And I'm using Daniel Smith watercolors here in case anybody is wondering. I love Daniel Smith watercolors. They are light fast. I just love the way they work. And I would sit there and mix that color, and I actually have a mixing palette that I can color a little. It's by Caran d'Ache. I can color a little bit of my pencil on it, and then I can take that and mix it with my regular watercolor, and I was able to get the perfect blend there. So you'll see here, I have a pencil in my hand there, and I'm laying in some of the shadow. But eventually I'm going to switch, and I'm just going to mix the stuff the color right on my Caran d'Ache palette that's made for one side smooth, the other side is pretty rough. So you can take your watercolor pencils and you can draw a swatch on that palette if you would, and then just take the water and activate that and paint directly from it. So you see there, I do keep bringing my phone up because I'm really checking, where are the creases? Where are the folds? I want to make sure that I have my shadows and my darks where they belong, and get my highlights in so that it looks like the fabric. I want a three-dimensional look to this. I don't want her to appear flat. She is the subject of this painting, right? She's the focus here. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I got it right. So I'll go back to that often. You'll see I have my phone on the left side, so I can see her in my first sketch where I painted this through. And I just painted that quickly, just because I wanted to test out how I was going to do it on the actual commission. So I started doing it there. Then I have my phone brought in, and I'll keep checking. I'll check both my reference image of her, the sketch or the initial painting that I did of it, as I am creating the final, painting. This was definitely a long process. Like I said, I had 20 hours into this, over 20 hours into this project. And yeah, I think it was worth it. I wanted to make sure that I took my time. I did not rush. And the difference, the difference between when I think about paintings and how they looked when I first was starting and paintings now, the difference is time. For sure. If you're painting, you're learning to paint, or you can paint, you just want to improve your paintings, I encourage you, patience. Spend a little bit more time. When you think it's done, look at it. Where can you improve some details? Are your darks dark enough? Are your highlights light enough? Those are the things that are really going to add dimension to your painting. Have you done enough layers? That was another thing with this background. It was the layers. Layer upon layer upon layer to get the depth that I wanted. And that was certainly something that, if I just sat down and did this in one quick swoop, I may have gotten something that looked good. But to get something that I really liked and was proud to put my name on, it was time. Just spending the time, taking it piece by piece, one section by one section, focusing on one specific element and getting that to be exactly the way I wanted. Like I focused on his, doing him first. Then I went to her. I'm working on her coat, and I'm only focusing on her coat right now. Then I'll switch and I'll go back to the pants, and I'm focusing on the pants, and I'm not looking at it as these are her pants. I will actually look at that and break it down to shapes that I'm seeing, right? Maybe there's a triangle in one area, and that triangle, when I paint it a certain way, once I back up, looks like the perfect crease. So it's just focusing on those kind of details. I just want to take a moment and say thank you. I know that this is a long video, and I appreciate you sticking around and seeing it through with me. YouTube definitely rewards interaction, and it is very important if you take a moment and hit that thumbs up if you got value out of this or you enjoyed it. Hit that thumbs up button. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Or share it directly with somebody else you think might enjoy it. It definitely helps creators that you watch on YouTube when you interact with their videos. And I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you and let you know that I greatly appreciate your doing so. As this video winds down, I wanted to leave you with a song that I thought was appropriate. This commission was a portrayal of Olivia and the love of her life, Nick, who even many, many years after his passing remained the one and only love of her life. And I just thought that this might be a fitting way to let this video wind down, and I hope that you enjoy it. I would like to extend my deepest sympathies to Miss Olivia's family. From what I've come to know through working on this project, she was a very special lady indeed, and my heartfelt condolences go out to each and every one of you. To everyone who is watching, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today and watching this very special commission. It was an honor to be able to be a part of this. And without further ado, I will let you watch the rest.
I know you've heard it all before, but you are the love of my life. knew when you came through the door that you are the love of my life. Nothing's hard, everything is easy with you around. No bombards, everything is easy when you come around. Hold on now. I remember meeting you in a dream, thinking that's the love of my life. Most handsome man I'd ever seen. I said, you must be the love of my life. Hold on now. Nothing's hard, everything is easy with you around. No bombards, everything is easy when you come around. Hold on now. Don't let go. Don't let go of me. Don't let go. Don't let go. Nothing's hard, everything is easy with you around. No bombards, everything is easy when you come around. Hold on now. Hold on now.